Hello and welcome back to another news video with me, Meoni, and this is looking at a brand new interview that was posted on CGMagOnline's website. I've looked at some of their interviews before, they're quite good, and I usually run a digest of interviews I find on the internet so that people can actually listen to these rather than just having to read them. A full link to the full article with all of the questions and answers and information will be in the description of this video as usual. I take absolutely no credit for this article and I advise you go and share CGMagOnline some love. So with that being said, let's look at these interview questions, to which the answers are going to be quite interesting, and it'll be fun to see how they contrast to some of the similar questions no doubt that were asked at the media tour, and I'm curious to see how the team's shaping up with Shadowbringers just around the corner. So firstly, CGMagOnline thanks Yoshida for sitting down with them, and they actually had the first interview appointment of the E3 show with Naoki Yoshida, so it's very likely there are other interviews that are going to be put out in the next few days, so we'll have to look out for those. And Yoshida says, "I've been so busy that I haven't had time to jump into Final Fantasy XIV as a player recently, so I'm looking forward to doing that once Shadowbringers releases. But there's no time for me to rest just yet. I have Japan Expo coming up immediately after this, so..." To which CGMag says, "Sounds rough, you need a vacation. Maybe Aspen. Do a little snowboarding?" To which Yoshi says, "That'd be nice." I mean, it's true, he's been through a lot. I can only imagine what it's like at Square Enix right now, but I wouldn't want to be in their shoes with that kind of pressure for sure. Anyway, the first question that CGMag asks is, has the team ever discussed the possibility of adding a way to queue for duties as several roles and then have the system automatically select the most appropriate one according to need? Yoshi responds, "We've certainly thought about it on a conceptual level, but we haven't really considered implementing such a thing. Look at it this way, if you're a single player going into the queue, signed up for multiple roles, you might expect to be matched fairly quickly according to need, right? But if you consider that there are multiple players doing this at the same time, isn't able to definitely distinguish the specific role they actually want to play. The more people that enter the queue, the more matching starts to misalign, making it more difficult for the system to put together a full party. The fact that such a system would actually extend queue times in this fashion makes it unrealistic for us to implement. Fast queue times that match players using the preferred roles is our optimal solution here." That's interesting. So if you're unfamiliar as a viewer to this video of playing World of Warcraft, in that game essentially if your class, say a druid, has multiple different forms, i.e. different roles, so they can be a tank, healer or two forms of DPS, then essentially what you can do is you can queue for multiple roles in the duty finder, let's say, and basically what pops up will be whatever's needed the most. Usually a healer or a tank will be the preferred thing. You can queue directly for one specific role, but for the most part it did just default to having healers. So if you wanted to level up your DPS, for example, most people in Warcraft had a healer set to equip just because they wouldn't be able to level up as fast otherwise. So yeah, what Yoshi says does kind of make sense. The next question. The Final Fantasy theme park concept of 14 allows for some neat external collaborations that don't really happen elsewhere in the industry. Are there any guest artists or designers, either within Square Enix or without, that you'd really like to get involved with but haven't yet? Yoshi says, "Interesting question. Tekken series producer Katsuhiro Harada is actually an avid MMORPG player, so I'd be curious to see what kind of 14 content he could dream up." To which CGMag replies, "Hey, there was Ultimate Fight Final Fantasy XIV, the April Fool's joke the team put together back in 2015. There's your foundation." To which Yoshi simply laughs and says, "Ah, you're right." Next up, CGMag says, "There is a strong relationship between Final Fantasy XIV and food, from the Eorzea Cafe to the various cross-promotions in both the US and Japan. One player even started a blog called Eorzean Eats, where they are cataloguing their attempts to cook every single recipe in 14. Given that, and the considerable success of both Encyclopedia Eorzea volumes, how far are we from an official cookbook?" Yoshi replies, "We've gotten plenty of requests from players for this actually. As you may already know, Square Enix does have a publishing division, and I asked them if we would have an opportunity to make this. Now, traditionally that division's forte has always been publishing strategy guides for our games, so a cookbook didn't seem to them like a venture worth pursuing. Today, however, many players tend to look online or at digital apps for game strategies. There has also been some shifting in our organisation recently, and as As a result, the publishing division wants to expand the breadth of their catalogue. Basically, that means a cookbook is something that could potentially happen in the future, but we don't currently have anything in the works. Come to think of it, I wonder what kind of chef we would have to bring on to help craft the recipes, and working on a recipe app could be quite fun too. End quote. Now, if you've not seen on Reddit, or actually there's a YouTube channel, I'll link that in the description. Basically, there are people on the internet who are trying to make recipes based on the stuff in Eorzea, and some of them look amazing and some of them just look completely revolting. So yeah, I'd pay money to see that happen. I'd probably even do a video series myself following it and completely messing it up because I'm really bad at cooking, but yeah, that'd be fun. Next up, CGMag asks, until now much of 14's narrative has been centered around a player being a champion of light who fights against the forces of darkness. With Shadowbringers, the script is flipped on a large scale. Were there any challenges in disentangling the ideas of good and light from one another? And how is this reflected in your creative approach to enemy design in Shadowbringers? To which Yoshi replies, from my own personal experience with fantasy media, there typically seems to be a conflation of light or justice with the notion of good. It feels unilateral to me. Surely any force that goes too far in any one direction can't be entirely good, right? That's why I figured that if there were too much light in the world of 14, there had to be some negative effects. The linchpin here is the Warrior of Light being so thoroughly active in their duties as the realm's champion that their light has become overbearing, disrupting the balance. That's exactly what happened in the first, the setting for Shadowbringers, and why it has been decimated by the Flood of Light. We felt that restoring the balance would make for a very Final Fantasy-like narrative. In terms of enemy design for Shadowbringers, this was actually a big stumbling block for us. Some context. Generally speaking, Japanese people tend to be rather agnostic, so to speak, acknowledging aspects of all religions. On Christmas, we exchange presents with one another, but a week later we're at Shinto shrines making offerings for the new year. We're neutral in that sense. So when we think about the concept of evil, we have a comparatively large pool of ideas to draw from. Now, in designing foes that stem from a source of light that has become too powerful, it's all too easily to immediately jump to the idea of a fallen angel. We specifically wanted to avoid that pitfall in Shadowbringers. Players will be fighting against the first Sin Eaters, yes, but they are not necessarily angels. It's funny, when our artists first started conceptualizing new enemies, they couldn't resist the pull of drawing meticulously feathered wings on their creatures. I feel that's oversimplifying things. That's why I had to ask them for several retakes whenever I saw those wings would start to appear. I had to explicitly ask them to tone down the designs. Basically, I told them to come up with something super demonic looking and then make it white, he laughs. We definitely did struggle with this concept because it's apparently been ingrained into our collective unconsciousness to associate white with good and black with evil. End quote. That is a really interesting perspective. I never really thought about it that much, but I suppose if I was to design something that's overwhelmingly light but evil, I would probably go the same direction, like an evil angel or corrupted Valkyr from World of Warcraft, that sort of route. Yeah, that's a really tricky pitfall. From what I have seen in the trailers though, there does seem to be a lot of feathered creatures, and where there's no feathers, they have swords coming out their back instead, so I don't know if that's a bit of a cop-out. I don't know. It's interesting regardless. I'm really curious to see how many monsters look like they should have wings but have had them plucked. We'll have to wait and see. That'll be fun. The next question from CGMag says, at the 2019 Media Tour in San Francisco last month, you gave a thoughtful and nuanced answer to the hot topic of gendered expression in 14 via clothing options. I wanted to say thank you for being aware of this discourse and giving thought to players' feelings. Is there anything you haven't had an opportunity to express on this issue, or any comments you would like to clarify at this time? To which Yoshi says, individual expression actually ties into what we're trying to depict in Shadowbringers by challenging the idea of light being good and dark being bad. They are not absolutes. As people, our values are formed at the intersection of many factors: education, history, religious teachings, and so on. They are typically something we gain through instruction. With regards to the conversation surrounding gender and matters of personal expression, we need to acknowledge that people's values influence, whether they see this as a positive or a negative thing. We can't change that. We can't change what people are taught, but we are in the process of changing our perspective. And that's important to keep in mind. With matters regarding LGBTQ plus expression in Final Fantasy XIV, we can't necessarily say that people who oppose it are universally evil and that people who are for it are universally good. It's understandable that if you were raised with certain preconceived notions about gender or sexuality, then you would not necessarily think to challenge them. What we are trying to impart to our players is a sense of freedom. The freedom to choose how they want to express themselves as individuals, and the freedom to retain their own values. We don't want to place blame on either side. If we do become one-sided in a way we approach things, much like the seemingly good force of light overtaking the first, we run the risk of being too extreme and alienating the people who stand on the other side of the issue. We are prioritizing freedom, and we are still on the road to finding a way for everyone to understand that we are all free to make our own choices, end quote. So that's quite a heavy topic to cover and quite an elegant way of actually replying to it. I have quite a lot of faith in that response. I mean, it's an issue that you could say anything on and people will take fault with. It was a good way of addressing the issue, and keeping an open mind is definitely the best way to go, I think. And letting people make their own choices. So CGMag actually replies, "Thank you for thinking about this. It's a delicate issue to be sure. For what it's worth, I appreciate that 14 did grant me the freedom to use the ceremony of eternal bonding to marry my male partner back in 2015, and that meant a lot to me." Yoshi replies, "I'm glad, and to reiterate, I don't want to measure our players on a yardstick of good versus bad, we just want to give them options. 14 is a social game, and there are always going to be players from different countries, decades, cultures, backgrounds, and so on." And last but not least, the final question that CGMag decides to pose is, if you had to guess, what percentage of Final Fantasy XIV composer Masayoshi Soken's diet is composed of Lawson's karaage-kun, which is obviously chicken in Japan? Yoshi replies, "First and foremost, Soken-san's diet is incredibly particular," he laughs. "Whenever he's concentrating really hard on composing, he neglects to eat at all. He says he doesn't get hungry when he's super focused. But then, when he snaps back to reality after writing a few songs, he cries, 'I'm starving,' and immediately reaches for whatever snacks are in arm's reach. He really just goes wild. And I say snacks, but he doesn't like sweets, so it's usually potato chips and the like. Of course, stuff like that leaves him still feeling hungry, so he'll go to the Lawson downstairs beneath our office, walk up to the counter, point dramatically to the hot food section, and say, 'Give me everything you have from there to here,' the whole shelf of karaage-kun. Then he ends up bringing a ton back to the office and passing it out to the staff members. I can't guess how much of his diet consists of karaage-kun, but I would say that Final Fantasy XIV's musical compositions are at least 30% fueled by Soken's insatiable craving for chicken." And end quote. So there you go. So all of the good music that we've been listening to for quite some time now, over a few years, have all been fueled by the power of chicken. So yeah, on that note, I think this was a fantastic interview. There was a lot of tidbits of information. It was really cool to see how they approached the design of various monsters and things like that. You know, there wasn't really many direct questions towards the gameplay mechanics or anything like that. So in some ways, some people might be a little bit disappointed in that general regard. But overall, I quite enjoyed this one. I love reading these, and I'm sure there's going to be a hell of a lot more over the next few days from the likes of Famitsu, etc. So on that note, thank you kindly for watching, and I will see you all next time. Now I want chicken. That's really bad, isn't it?